legal motions filed by Channel 8. However, the Pentagon is still withholding other sensitive material in defiance of the court.
George Knapp of the Channel 8 I-Team is here with the story. George.
Paula and Mark, after several months, numerous delays, and 3 court orders, the Pentagon has finally coughed up some of the material concerning a lawsuit filed by former workers at Area 51. Considering how much the military has been dragging its feet, you might think the documents held vital national secrets. Not so.
Itself. And by that I mean that they're saying that they can classify evidence of their own crimes.
Law professor Jonathan Turley represents former Area 51 employees who say they were exposed to toxic materials at the base. The military has contended the lawsuit can't proceed because it would endanger national security to reveal anything about the base, including whether there's any paint or jet fuel stored there. Channel 8 News asked the court to unseal transcripts from the trial, transcripts which had no reason to be sealed in the first place.
Then why is the hearing being concealed? And the answer is the oldest answer in the book. The government's embarrassed. It doesn't want the public to know what it did behind closed doors.
The Pentagon reluctantly released hundreds of pages from the trial, including copies of an Area 51 security manual, which teaches base security officers how to lie to the public. The manual confirms that Area 51 has its own swimming pool, tennis courts, and corner bar. Also released was testimony from base workers who witnessed exposures to toxic chemicals. But the most important material requested by Channel 8 and ordered released by the court is still being withheld. When and if it is finally released, the material could show the extreme lengths the government has taken in order to hide evidence of its own crimes.
And frankly, it's bloody ridiculous for the government to continue to reinterpret orders and delay the release of information. We are not going away.
Nor are we. Today, the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals acknowledged the government's delay tactics. It granted the Area 51 employees more time to file their appeal based on the fact that the Pentagon has not yet handed over the information that Channel 8 and the workers have requested.
Is this stuff that's being withheld, is it classified stuff?
No, it's not like it's how to build an atomic bomb or how to fly a stealth. It's, I'll tell you what it is. Professor Turley is under a court order. He can't. What it is, it's going to show that the government went to extreme lengths in its case against these workers. It even threatened to use force to seize non-classified material from the lawyer for these workers. So that's what they're worried about getting out.
So you've told us you don't have to kill us now.
The reason these debriefings are being allowed to go public is because President Bush's Director of National Intelligence, Admiral J. Mike McConnell, signed an order to make it so.
I have never met an alien, but I have met an extraterrestrial.
In the vastness of the cosmos, there must be other civilizations far older and more advanced than ours. So shouldn't we have been visited? Shouldn't there be every now and then alien ships in the skies of Earth?
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
Throughout the last 60 years, people have been anxious for some brave, patriotic person to come forward from what we call the secret government, to tell his story to the world at large. At last that hope is being fulfilled by a young scientist, a microbiologist, who has worked for the secret government his entire adult life. He was recruited in 1986, when he was only 22 years old, to help other government scientists to work on various black projects, including defensive biowarfare protocols for soldiers in Gulf War I. He has been allowed to enter most of the secret laboratories that are part of the U.S. arsenal: S4 at Groom Lake, Dulce at Los Alamos, Brookhaven, Lawrence Livermore, to name a few. These interviews have taken place at various secret locations around the Las Vegas area. This information has been reluctantly sanctioned by what is known as Majestic 12, a group that President Truman assembled in September 1947 to deal with the known alien presence as a result of the Roswell crash. Live aliens were recovered, as well as other visitors, through the intervening years. Majestic 12 has been concealing this information until now. Dan Burisch is anxious to tell his story. This series of in-depth interviews has started the process. The internet has been very beneficial in helping to tell his story. However, there is nothing like seeing him in person, tell his adventures in minute detail.
I just prefer it be more of a conversation rather than the other makes me feel as though I'm testifying. And as long as we're in a closed session, so help me God. Initially, I was briefed that JRod was an alien, specifically from the reticulum system, to reticulum 4. I had no idea the truth. Yes, from 2 reticulum 4 now, but I had no idea the truth of how they came to be. As I said to you before, I have never met an alien, but I have met an extraterrestrial. From what I understand, there's currently a 17-16 split. This is mostly rumor around the community to forward a public acclamation program having to do with the Majestic 12 and the overseeing committee, the old 5412, which is now basically called the Committee of the Majority, as far as I'm told. How ancient? Sumerian? Well, several locations in the mid-90s. I had some cover positions here in Las Vegas, which made me look like a good old-fashioned Joe. In fact, I had had some police experience at the late 80s. You're probably centering your question around work for the government. In 1986, I was approached while working as an undergraduate student in Dr. Bert Bell Barbero's office, in his parasitology laboratory, to be exact. I was looking through a scope at the time. 3 gentlemen walked into the laboratory, closed the door behind them. There was 2 uniforms and a suit that were present. Both of the uniforms I would make as most probably being United States Navy. My memory of that one event's kind of hazy after seeing all of the suits and uniforms and whatnot. We spoke for a while. They asked me if I was interested in seeing the world and the like. I told them I in fact was. We went through several interview processes, not unlike this, and reviewed my background. I went through several background investigations. Finally, starting up 90-91 time frame, I was cleared for working past Groom to the Papoose Mountain facility, that place that doesn't exist, about 90 miles north of here, the nowhere place. That's how I came to work there. My original assignment was at the Groom Lake facility to review histopathology slides. And I went through nearly a year's testing and then was basically let loose for a year, and I heard no contact from them. After that, I was brought back in and shown some higher grade slides of unknown origin. Following that, I was introduced into a working group and subsequently brought into the Papoose facility, the Site 4 facility. We worked for well over a year on slides of unknown origin. After I took a minimum leadership position under several of the other biologists who are already present, most of which are now deceased. You know the names of those individuals. I was then introduced into the level 4 or 5 facility. And so what we did is introduce the new members, myself amongst them, into the clean sphere area, and we were eventually shown the subject for which we were examining the slides. The slides were unusual in that they were in pressurized cells, and they were reviewed by us on a conveyor with a completely automatic microscope. We weren't touching anything. We give verbal commands. At the second instance, we were finally allowed to have a VRML-like keyboard for examining the slides, and I digressed. But then working with the JRod itself in the ambassadorial suite or the clean sphere suite. Yes, yes. Initially, I was assigned as a working member of Project Aquarius. Then finally, I was made an assistant working group leader. And then mysteriously, after one meeting with the JRod, I was asked to take the working group leader position. I didn't find out why I was asked to take the working group leader position until, well, within this last year. I never understood it because Stephen was older than I. He was my senior not only in ability, but in age. And I would have never figured being advanced above an individual like that in ranking within a working group. And in fact, I never considered myself above him. We worked together. I found out subsequent to interactions with the JRod. And again, they have personal names. The term JRod simply means 15, which was a basing name for where they're located, the number of light years from our location. So they took those names. And they identified through the Sigma protocols, the linguistic protocols, with a rod symbol, which was an inertia symbol, and the letter J. And in fact, that was a combination of Mayan and Egyptian numerology having to do with a rod and a J, meaning 10 and 5 for 15. He crashed in '63, from what I understand, outside of Kingman.
Okay.
Kingman, Arizona. There was a problem involving his physiology and his biophysiological communication with the craft went wrong. And of course, he's ill, as we know, with the MGUS and the paraprotein associated problems. And he crashed. We had regular systematic medicals by a physician. Following that, we would be suited, well, we would be catheterized, plugged, and suited. Communication apparatus was placed on our heads. We had a cooling system set up. It was, for all intents and purposes, it was a spacesuit. It was a total encapsulated suit, something like what you would find in a NASA facility. It was more of a regular space-type suit with joints. We were suited up, we were pressurized, and then walked with our cooling system and our hosing down a ramp into the ambassadorial suite. Following that, we were led up a gantry-way, which had been moved into position by the clean sphere, which had been previously rotated up through an iris through the floor. He was held actually below the ambassadorial suite level, and that was raised up as needed. What they did with him down there, he didn't say, and they didn't tell me. It was not a need-to-know issue. Apparently, they dealt with the cleaning of the sphere and all of that down there. The regular housed animal maintenance, as they treated him. We would be led up the gantry way. The hoses would be hooked into an exterior system inside the doorway, which was exterior to the clean sphere. And it was called the exterior system, in fact. But we would be let in, the door would be closed, and we would be pressurized inside of the gantry-way. Following that, there was a drum system that was set up. Once there was an equal pressurization between the gantry-way and the clean sphere, we would then be told to proceed forward. I would raise a hand in acknowledgement. We were not supposed to talk at the time at all because nothing verbal around the specimen, around the JRod. Why, I was never told, but we were not supposed to talk around the JRod. I moved the drum system and re-hooked a secondary set of hosing inside the clean sphere, checked the pressurization, and once that was done, the door to the clean sphere would be closed behind me, and I would presume that the pressurization remained the same in the gantry-way. Following that, I would do my business inside of the clean sphere involving contacting the JRod and removing the samples. My original feeling was I was looking at a giant insect. It's the best I can just off the cuff. It looked like a giant insect, being dark brown and hunched in a corner, very insectoid in appearance. It almost looked like it had an exoskeleton. I felt afraid inside because I was always told that monsters weren't real. And now I find out they are, but they live in the heart of men. It was fear, excitement, complete astonishment. Because honestly, I thought we were dealing with some sort of monkey. Something like an old world ape or the like, but indeed it wasn't. That's what my feeling was. I'm not going to lay on and talk about how intellectual I was at the time about it. It scared the hell out of me. The gentleman with which I was associated was approximately 3.5 feet tall. He had a dark brown appearance, very ruddy appearance to his skin. He was in a highly pressurized clean sphere. He exuded glycoprotein-like material through pores on his skin, which was associated with the neuritis, the neuropathy that we were dealing with. 3.5 feet, large head in comparison to torso. So the ratio of the cranial to the torso area would be larger than in what we would call a modern human being. Large, bulbous black eyes. The whites of the eyes had been selected out. So it looked like a large pupil, basically. When you look into his eyes, you feel like you're going to fall into his eyes forever. And I think that probably had something to do with the telepathic nature of his mental structure. Large arms, 4 very thin, sinuous fingers, nails. His feet were unusual in that his plantar area had a very large knob underneath what we would call our heel. His facial features were grotesque in comparison to what he showed me what normal would be. He was bilaterally symmetrical to the extent that the disease process was not changing his facial features. Nose was recessed, not a nose like we have, but basically two operculum, 2 orifices. An extremely small mouth, a hard palate, no teeth. His musculature, again, it was suffering from the problem at the myoneural junction. We were removing samples to attempt a treatment, a full diagnosis and a treatment for a paraprotein-related monoclonal gammopathy of uncertain significance type disorder, which had various attributes to it, among which were a cocaine type presence to the JRod, cocaine syndrome type presence, and certain genetic issues involving chromosome 5 and 17, which led us to Charcot-Marie tooth disorder, and their glycoprotein, their antifreeze glycoprotein problems. They were essentially they were losing heat because of the problems at their axonal ridges. They were not transmitting the energy, something like a dystrophy. And when the action potential goes down a nerve, well, their action potentials were dying at the synapse. He wasn't forming plaques. He was simply demyelinating, repairing the demyelination area with the immune system. They've got a cell-mediated immune system, humoral system, just like we have. The cells are different. They've got Philippodia, but very strange looking blood-like material. But it's like it. But that's why we use the term analog so much, because it was different. It was different. He was hunched over most of the time, could not support himself fully, given muscular atrophy, and that had to do with the peripheral neuropathy under which he was suffering. So he would grunt and move toward me almost in a flopping fashion. Feet were large in comparison to what we would say our feet would be.
How many
He
toes?
was unclothed 4.
4.
Yeah, he was unclothed, which bothered him. He wanted to wear clothing and was refused in every turn. Called himself captive, and justifiably so. I believe he and associates were transferred separately.
Mm-hmm.
He to the originally to the Groom Lake facility,
Okay.
and an associate to, I believe, Los Alamos. I have no independent verification of where the associate went, though. All I can say is that he was there at Site 4, right? There was a very specific procedure. After we would be brought in with our helper biologists, there was controlling helper biologists, those in the gallery, and then the introduction specialist, which was myself on a number of occasions. We entered the clean sphere through a large series of protocols involving pressurization and compartmentalization, no pun intended, until finally we were pressurized in fully encapsulated a TEC, a TES, total encapsulated suit, for entrance into the clean sphere. Once we were pressurized and entered into the clean sphere, well, I should digress, we had a medical evaluation and all of that first. But they ceased doing that after a couple of medical evaluations. It was more just interested, let's get you in and get the work done. I would enter into the clean sphere, and I was not supposed to communicate with the JRod at all. I was not supposed to know his name. The reality is we were communicating from the time that I entered into the ambassadorial suite external to the clean sphere, talking back and forth freely. I could hear whatever he was projecting at me from thought, and he could very clearly hear what I was thinking. I say hear, meaning perceive. I was supposed to stand over by a hologram projection system, which was run as like a teleprompter system, over to my right, that would be run inside of the clean sphere glass. Hold my hand up and mimic certain signs. And it became a joke. It really did. It became a joke. Those folks who were watching from the gallery running the show thought that I was standing there and mimicking the signs, and this was the only communication underway. They perceived on the day that the approach, the close approach that he made, the grabbing incident that he did with me, they perceived that there was a communication that occurred. So I began getting questioned quite extensively whether or not he in fact was communicating with me, because he had promised not to, apparently, with the Sigma unit. I alluded to the fact that there was conversation underway, but I didn't talk about what it was until, of course, I was caught in my research protocol forwarding ideas that were somewhat different than what they expected, where they expected my private research was going to go, and this is much later. And at that time, the deal was brokered to find out about the doctrine for the convergent timeline paradox. I told them a little bit about what he showed me, a little bit, and they told me a little bit about the DCTP. No, not as far as I'm aware. Not as far as he told me, no. They excrete in a manner that we would excrete. Their external genitalia are different than ours. The females have somewhat like vulva, but they have a clasper situation. The male has a male clasper, the female claspers. It looks like a disc with rectangular solids that are rotated into position for clasping at the inguinal region. They do have internal fertilization.
Now, this was something you read because you didn't see a female, did you?
No, this is something he showed me of his wife. Yes.
And how was that image presented to you? Did it appear...
I was inside the image.
You were inside the image?
That's what it felt like.
Like virtual reality?
Yes. Everything that he showed me when this was the incident. When he projected it into me, it felt like I was there. My sensations were heightened. Quite extraordinary. Again, excuse the pun, a gray surrounding. Very, very dull, drab surrounding. Almost like a concrete evacuation center. Where you'd have evacuation zones underneath the hotels in case of mass casualties or mass disaster, where it was a very clinical environment. He was extremely depressed. If we were to term him human, I'm not a psychologist, but I think he would be termed as clinically depressed. He wept, but he didn't weep outside. He wept when he was with me. Smarter than me. He was smarter than me by a long range.
Did he have a wide range of knowledge?
The mathematics that he showed me blew my mind. He showed me concurrently not only the equations for the rule of nines, but he also did so diagrammatically, and he did so with three-dimensional, like a VRML system, where I was watching cubes come together. So that if I was not understanding the script, I would understand it as a child learns group theory in mathematics. Highly evolved, highly intellectual, highly repressed emotionally. When I was with him, I felt great happiness to be with him, but I could feel his great sadness, not only because of what he wanted to become, what he knew he was by being present with us, but where he was and how he was being treated. He was not part of the group that has to be catered to involving the T9 treaty that was just signed. He wanted to help. He was willing. When I went in, for God's sakes, I took well over, nearly 300 individualized aspiration samples from his neurological system. He would hold his arm out for me to take them. There was no pain medication. And whenever I would fire the introduction system to remove the sample, it was an aspirative avulsion system, he would cry, and then he would just stand there and look at me. I would bring the sample after the initial removal from his tissues into the introduction system, and then approve it and move it from there to one of the helper biologists. Usually it was Robert, outside of the clean sphere, and then he would move it from there to be handled under our normal protocols. It was a level 5 past our the BMBL system. He'd just stand there and take it. Feet. Definitely 60 feet.
Okay.
It was 60 feet from the center of the clean sphere to the introduction ramp going down into the ambassadorial suite. So at least 60 feet. No. I could tell that it was somebody other than me, and I could tell because I felt drawn toward the subject that was sending the communication. When the JRod spoke with me prior to the bombardment of the images, it was something that was part of me, but not part of me. I actually felt non-resident for a moment. It was almost an OBE type feeling. And then I could feel myself pull back and experience the sound. It was physical. It was more real than touching an object. And that's the only real time that I felt anything, more physical than physical. If he was upset, I could feel his pain. It got to the point where, as I was doing the needle introductions, I could feel what he was feeling. So as I would inject the needle under the integument and find my proper location prior to removing the sample, I could feel the needle entering him. So I could feel his feelings. The folks that wanted to find out what he was saying to me, they knew darn well that he was communicating with me after a while, because I was smiling. I couldn't help it, because we were actually joking back and forth. And they didn't know. They didn't have any clue. They didn't have any clue what he was saying. So it had to have been selective. They certainly wouldn't have pressed me like they did after I woke up from the big attention scenario. I woke up outside of the clean sphere. I was drug out of there by Stephen. He finally got a secondary suit on and drugged me out of the clean sphere. No, they had no clue. They had no clue what he was saying. I'm sure of it. They were extra rough in removing my plug and my catheter and all of that business after I got out of the TES. It's multifocal. There's several reasons. The largest reason is not the most important reason. The largest reason from a personal perspective is to step out from under the Black Ops community and retire. I'm ready. I told you before, I can see myself walking along a pond and not being bothered by anybody except for maybe a bird here or there and taking a sample and just taking my time and looking at it for fun. Well, my health is degrading. There's no doubt about that.
Mm-hmm.
The heart disease that I have is in fact degrading my health. Time is coming. I don't know how long that is, and of course that's within God's providence. Yes. Disappear at Walden's Pond. There are other reasons too. You know, without yelling the poor me scenario. Yes, people have a right to know. I mean, that's, you know, other folks have screamed that. Some of them, I think, real. Some of them phony as a $3 bill. Yes, they have a right to know what is going on. They have a right to know because this is their future. Or maybe not. And it depends upon our wisdom or lack thereof. This gets me thinking. The one thing that we've heard from the Brookings Institution study, the famous clamp study, was this would cause a great social upheaval. It would destroy our social bonds, our religious bonds. And in fact, I know I'm digressing, but I ramble. Every time an individual is approached with the issue of, would this destroy your faith? I have heard, this is my experience only, I'm sure there are going to be varied opinions, no, it'd strengthen it. It'd strengthen it. From a certain perspective, yes. From another perspective, no. The Brookings Institution was correct on a certain level. Suspend disbelief for a moment and walk with the idea that this is real. That the ruins that are present on the moon and on Mars, the ancient temples, were in fact, and are in fact, the gifts of our own progeny. Can you imagine what is going to happen when those temples, which were prayed to as the gods, are found out to be nothing more than the creations of men? That the men themselves were those who were being worshipped, will fall headlong into the pool of Narcissus. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we'll find truth, love, God, in something other than buildings and stones and marble. Maybe we'll find out who he really is, or she, it, or just us. You want an experience of Site 4, watch the Andromeda Strain. Except for there's a little more color inside of Site 4. They've got a nice orange stripe on the wall, and they've got a red and blue stripe on the floor, which gives you general directions depending upon the floor you're on, and you can't move without getting stopped anyway. Now we're talking separate to the groom facility here. I'm aware of several floors at the groom facility, and then finally the majority of the hot stuff was taken over to Site 4. We're talking 4 basic levels. The first level, and they're coded 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, and then finally where he was stored is 4.5. And that 4.5 designation was painted on the wall for him because 4 and 5 is 9. That's why, in fact, they built 9 hangars on the Galileo and Sidekick levels, the 4.1 level. The 4.2 level contained the looking glass, Alice's glass. In fact, outside of the door for the major facility, there's a white rabbit with a clock. A very large, it's a statue that's probably about that tall, and it's held above the doorway. It's wired above the doorway. The looking glass, I find out, is one of the ERBs. It's an Einstein-Rosenbridge promoter. It uses some form of, and this is found out, Jesus Christ, in the last 2 weeks. Asking the right questions there, I guess. It's composed of a spherical, spinning, arced, rectangular solid matrix of nickel, cadmium, and barium. There is a spinning disk underneath it, which is supercooled. Into this is injected into the center of these spinning, and I'm not a physicist, spinning disks. Is injected an argon gas. Into that is injected some type of repulsion matter. It's a gravity repulsion matter. They are obtaining the gravity repulsion matter from the heavy materials that have been obtained from the JRods, the 115 variety material. And apparently when they bombard it with enough electromagnetism, this stuff repels gravity and it turns into some sort of exotic matter. They spin it fast enough, it opens, or they can see through it. And that is, from what I understand, the great prize in what's going on in the world right now, are those devices. Why do you think the British are running around Iraq right now looking for the climatological records that are just happen to be disappeared out of the Baghdad Museum with the rest of the cylinder seals? There were mistakes. Animals were attempted to transport from one location to another, the production of 2 of the devices, and they put them in resonance or something like that. I'm not a physicist. I don't know. But I was, in fact, present during a human attempt. The human did not survive. The human was not put in there under duress of any sort. It was a volunteer situation, and the human did not survive. The human did not move. The human stayed where the human was put. But the human changed, and I don't want to talk about it anymore. It was a attempt to transport an individual over linear distance, which I understand is the same thing as time travel. Distance is time. Yeah. From what I understand, they've only used it for information purposes. Aside from that, how they get the information out of it, no clue. I don't know. What specific information they've obtained, I only know of one piece of information, and that is the rush, why the rush is underway to get Lotus done by the 2005 deadline. That in fact this group of JRods that are not complying with the wishes of the committee and the wishes of the rest of the JRods and the associated brothers, to put a clamp on them so that they stop their influence within the political structures of our government, including the financial structures. That it is in fact their slowing down of the progress to stopping getting these, picking up these little gates that were put together. That would be our downfall in 2012. They wish to find a resolution to the broken resonance between they and the other half of they, the so-called Orions and the Reticulans. They also wish to, for fear of extinction, have a relief of the paraprotein related problem. And speaking about that just for a moment, we found out that some of the disease process under which they're fighting is a PNA. It's a peptide nucleic acid. I don't know if you're, well, a protein-associated background nucleic acid. And that protein-associated background is a prion, which goes to one of the things that they wanted me to do at Sweetness. Very dangerous, very dangerous. But the exchange process is to solve the problem to prevent what went wrong in 2012. And the rogue, if you will, group of the JRods are not cooperating with that. But a deal has been brokered for the T9 treaty to be held in abeyance until 2005. When that treaty is upped in 2005, once they receive what they've asked for, and they should be receiving a little more, and I've already mentioned some of that material that they're not aware of yet, the PNA material and some of the things that we can do with the oligonucleotides to possibly help facilitate the problems. But once that's upped, they are supposed to come under the auspices of the general agreement between the Committee of the Majority and their respective societies. If so, nothing will get turned on aside from what nature and God is providing us in 2012, and we won't separate. However, they will remain as they are, their future selves as well. They will remain as they are, and we will remain as we are. We can't go back. That's just something that's impossible as far as what they can tell. We're going to get not wiped out. The biggest problem is to make sure that there are no human-created ERB machines. I mean, that sounds science fiction-ish, okay, and you know, it's hokey sounding, okay. To make sure that there are none of them in existence which can automatically turn on when the next age begins on December 21st, 2012. We are apparently going to cross over the plane of the galaxy, which there is a dense network of wormholes. There is supposed to be some sort of enlightenment, whether or not that's the Christ event, or whether that's a burp on a Sunday morning. I don't know what that's going to be. I'm not enough of a scholar in that area to figure that out, to know. I do know that failure would result in too much energy being directed at our planet from our star. And hence my interest in looking at the pretty pictures above the sun, the corona of the sun. It's the pace at which these unusual forms are being produced is increasing. What we see, for instance, I mentioned earlier ruins on the moon and Mars. Probably you're aware that I was involved in Inca City research, so-called Inca City. That's because the JRod showed me that as an image, but didn't show me that as an image of a dead city, showed me that as the image of a future city, a living, breathing society, post-damage here, post-catastrophe. We are literally looking at things that are present, but according to a linear timeline, haven't been built yet. According to the doctrine of the convergent timeline paradox, the JRods, to solve their paraprotein problem, used these ERBs to go back in time. And some of them were worshipped. They were treated as gods, and temples were built for them, and et cetera, et cetera. The so-called Anubis Ra, that sort of business again. I'm not, this is getting science fictiony because it sounds like poppycock. But this is what I got in exchange for the information that he gave me, so what the hell. Literally, there are 2 or more concurrent timelines that we're living in. 2 separate existences. And what that means exactly, that's what I read. What that means exactly, I'm not sure. To solve their problem, they messed around with us even earlier than earlier when they had been treated as gods. They went back, treated as gods, went back before. In other words, they could apparently select the timeline. How they do that, again, no clue. They manipulated our original DNA and removed a single strand from us. This made us able to mate with another experiment which was underway at the time called Neanderthalensis. And yes, I know there is no genetic evidence concerning the mating between the Neanderthals and the other brand, if you will, of our kind. That's because all of the genes have been turned off. Any of the unusual mating sequences aside from retroviruses that tagged along were turned off as part of our long intermittent sequences. They're part of the great repeats. And in fact, the Neanderthals, take a look at the number of long interspersing elements that they have in their genome, and that will bear out what I'm saying. There are a number of nodes on the planet, what I'm understanding, that naturally are sensitive electromagnetically. I don't know. Okay, they're naturally sensitive to the space through which we pass. These nodes activate spontaneously when we pass through them, or can be struck with electromagnetism and be temporarily opened. One they're trying to put, well, they have been putting, in fact, Saddam did put 2 of them together in Iraq, which conformed to the ancient cylinder seals, which are now missing from the library or the museum in Baghdad. Obviously somebody looted them. But they went to Tinian Island, by the way. That's where they went first. After that, I've got no clue. Mm-hmm. But they were looted by the best. Put it to you this way.
Now, haven't you been investigating a site where there is a natural...
Indeed,
Frenchman Mountain, and your work continues on Frenchman Mountain?
Yes, it does. Yes, okay. It does. Our remote viewing unit first brought the notion that this could be a wormhole situation. Mm-hmm. Yes, we've employed remote viewers for it. Since then, there have been occurrences at the mountain that are far and afield from the research that I would be doing for the Lotus. There's 2 separate things, just absolutely 2 separate things. Fundamentally, this project, without getting too deep into it, I've been accused of rambling by people before about it, but without getting too deep into it, this project is an all-encompassing attempt to grab for the brass ring and making sure that that brass ring is not the fruit of the tree of life. I'll grab just until we get to that point. Aside from that, I'm not going to try to barge my way into past the East Gate of Eden. The people who do that get hurt. For millennia, we've conceived of the supernatural and that supernatural's interaction with humankind. What we are seeing in this project is that it's not so much supernatural, it's natural, and it's been there with us all along, and we just haven't taken the time to look. In fact, our procedures have been mutually exclusive. Laboratory procedures have been mutually exclusive to find what we found. They would destroy or mask over the process that we're now beholding. These particles have the ability, in essence, to bend light. It's masking. The closer it gets to it, the more it masks. So if it passes by it, it looks like it. And then when it gets within close proximity, the wolf in sheep's clothing steps out and it does its business. Meanwhile, the average investigator, biological investigator, has ceased looking because the protocol has moved on. He or she has scanned a slide and has seen two eukaryotic cells and has moved on. I would be very happy and very relieved to feel as though I was responding to the elected government of the United States of America with what talents God's given me. I'm responsible to the people of the United States of America. The nature of the information to which I'm privy is sensitive enough that the full disclosure of that information would have to be done in an appropriate location and under appropriate circumstances. Certain military application information would have to be done in a closed session milieu for the national security. The Congress knows it's not in control. They know that this is a wild train out of control. And they want that control back. They're not stupid. They know that there are things that are going on down the hall from them that they can't fathom. They deserve to have that back in their hands because that's what they were elected to do. And if we care at all about what's left of our Constitution, they deserve to have that in their hands. Aren't we the masters of our destiny in our country? Aren't we supposed to be? Yes, sir. Supposed to be. I would like to tell our elected government what we're doing under the appropriate circumstances, because there are military applications that need to be handled in a very careful manner